Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Am I on camera? I'm possibly not on camera. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Let me find this live stream and see if we're functional. The local time is 11:48 a.m. on Friday, February 10th, 2023. Thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoy this session. We're 5 by 5. Thank you for reporting that. I'm grateful to you for that quick report. Let's say hi. I'm hearing a little bit of audio. Why? Hang on a second. Is that still you? Are you doing some audio? Nope. All right.
How are you? Stuffing my mouth.
Okay. Always get cotton mouth when I'm trying to make this happen. Each time we do this, it's a little bit easier until there's a problem. But so far, so good. Where are you viewing from today? We'll say hi to a few of you, and then we'll swing the camera around and invite you in visually and otherwise. Bitterroot, Montana, Selwood, Oregon, Basingstoke, England. Hello, Peter. Electric City, Washington, Marysville, Washington, Ben from the Netherlands, Glasgow, Scotland, Trim, Ireland, Burlington, Washington. Yeah, thanks for remembering to join us, or maybe you got some sort of notification. I don't know. We got about 100 so far. Bo's in Denmark. Another Bo is in Baltimore, Maryland, Dallas, Texas, Wed Lake, Wisconsin, Half Moon Bay, California. That's Ray. Kathy, have a good one. From Brisbane, Australia. It's been a while, Kathy. Thank you. I guess this is a good time for you, huh? The normal times for Baja, BC, those don't work for Down Under. La Quinta, California, Hobart, Australia, Carlton, Oregon, Torrance, California, and so on. Bastrop, Texas. Thank you, Bill. Bastrop. Walter, can I help somehow? You're learning names and faces? That's it. Okay, well, I'm going to ask one more time if there's any problems. I guess, what have we done here? I guess in a few minutes, we'll hook up the audio to our speaker, make sure you can hear her, and then I'll tell you guys right up front before I forget, or in case you're confused of some sort. We're still 5 by 5, Myra, thank you. Today's unusual because we have two speakers. Lisa will do the first half, roughly 30 minutes. Then she'll pass her mic over to Ann. Ann will do the second half. Then we'll do some live Q&A and try to have you guys listen in as well. That's it. It wasn't that hard, was it? Okay. Okay, good. Well, let me swing you around. Thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoy this lecture called 200 Years of Women in the Field, Contributions and Controversy in Geology. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm trying to get a dog.
You're trying to get a dog.
Yeah. It would be a service dog.
Okay.
So it'll go everywhere with me.
Well, that's nice.
I'm hoping to get a German Shepherd for it. So.
I'm sorry, I'm so distracted at the moment.
No, it's all right.
We got show business happening over here. Is that Lisa? Okay. All right. We're in a changing room now. Yeah, man. Sure.
Like taking pictures with that had the lens.
Viewers, are we still 5x5? Can you hear me, please? Testing one more time. The hell, I gotta find this freaking thing. Thank you, Mike and Paul and Sven. Well, we've got about 136 at the moment.
First good weather in a few days, and it's like this
I think that was black a minute ago. Now it's blue. Are they recording everything?
I don't know if it's
Yes,
Maybe we need some technical assistance. But look at all that stuff. That's ugly.
sure. Is her button on?
is it blue when it's on?
Yes.
Is the button blue?
Yes.
It is on.
Okay. Hang on just a sec.
Can we do a sound check?
Oh, okay.
Lisa, tell me about life growing up in Missouri, would you please? What was it like? We're testing your audio.
It was hot and humid, green.
Can you hear Lisa? Can you do Lisa yes or Lisa 5x5 or something like that, please?
Lisa, yes.
He's talking to the
Oh.
audience now, saying, "If you can hear you."
Oh,
Lisa, how do you spell your first name?
Lisa.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. That's unusual, isn't it? Isn't it usually? Just kidding. Okay, they can hear you, and that's great. We'll keep it just like that, Lisa, and just let you know that they can hear you now. If you're chit chatting with Ann, it's totally fine. Why is the broadcast not showing the right camera, though? I'm confused at the moment. What are you guys seeing right now at home? Right now, what are you seeing right now? What's going on? You can only see Ann. And now you're seeing the slide, correct? Something's not right here. When I switch to the wide camera, oh, that's the wide camera. Now you guys are seeing the room, right? I had the cameras reversed. All right, I feel better. I think. Damn, son. Okay, yes, you're a lot. Let me test our audio one more time. So I
Okay.
love your outfit, Lisa. I'm going to introduce you What's the title of the talk again today? We just need to hear you speak a little bit.
I'm not sure I remember the full title, and you took it down from the screen.
Yes, I
But
did.
it was
Oh, I didn't mean to
Women,
quiz you.
200 Years of Women in the Field,
Okay. All right.
Contributions and Controversy.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Did I pass?
They did. You passed with the correct answer, and they can hear you. Lisa is good. 5 by 5. Thank you. So I am in a few minutes, a couple minutes, going to mention the last two talks this winter, introduce both of you very quickly, and then you're going to make your grand entrance. Okay. You don't want to be seen until I say, welcome, Lisa. Gotcha. Okay.
Maria.
Thanks. Should I do it audio test? Can they hear Maria? Just kidding. That'll be too confusing.
If I'm not down here,
Okay. I'm still slightly confused, to be totally honest with you guys at home, but I think we're just going to go for it anyway. We're going to start our program in 1 minute.
Lady Mary falling out.
Thank you, Craig. This is what I look like when I'm trying to calm myself down.
relax.
Thank you.
Nothing me.
Okay. Thanks for joining us. We're going to start right now. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the session that we're having here on a Friday at noon. We got a good thing going now. We got another full room, so it's just terrific to have you. Jeff from Vinman's Bakery is not with us today, but he was here an hour ago to deliver all of his wonderful stuff. Is there anything left? No. Okay. Okay, Jeff, if he's watching the replay of this thing, thank you so much, Jeff, for all your generosity. Oh, come on. Come on, Jeff. And heartfelt applause. Excellent. So we've got all sorts of things lined up, not only this quarter, but next quarter as well. But let's just finish out the winter quarter and remind you of two more programs that we have scheduled. Hannah Shamloo and I have put this schedule together. Next Friday, we're off for this thing, but the following Friday, February 24th, that's 2 weeks from today, Tyler Schleiter, Hannah? Tyler Schleiter. The title, Comparing Whole Rock and Plagioclase hosted zircon records from the world's youngest super eruption. That's 2 weeks from today, Friday, February 24th. Here, you know the drill by now. And the following Friday, our last talk for this series in winter quarter, Friday, March 3rd, John Schellenberger will be driving up from Toppenish. He's the director of Native American Studies here at CWU, and he's giving a talk, Understanding Indigenous Landscapes on the Columbia Plateau. So that's it for this winter quarter. We have two speakers today, And both are longtime professors here in the department. Most of us know both of them, so I'm going to be very brief with my introduction. Lisa Ely, who's been here almost 30 years, is going to start, and she's going to speak for about 30 minutes, give or take. And then she will literally take her hot mic and give it to Ann Egger, who's been here more than 10 years. And Ann will take the second half an hour of our time together. And then there'll be a little time for live Q&A as usual, with those guys sharing the mic, I guess, or something like that. We'll figure out how to do that. But without further ado, can I make sure that you know the title of the talk? And we'll bring in our guest speaker, who's not by the name of Lisa Ely. You'll understand in a second. This talk is 200 Years of Women in the Field, Contributions and Controversy in Geology. Please help me welcome our two guests. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, for that wonderful introduction. But let me introduce myself today. My name is Maria Graham. And if I could have a few prompts, video prompts,
Yes.
that would be excellent.
Wonderful.
I'm going to be speaking to you today about my observations of a geological event, an earthquake, an enormous earthquake that happened in 1822 in Chile, which I myself personally observed before and after. And we'll see where the controversy comes in as we proceed a little bit farther with the presentation. So first I want to give a bit of background about myself. The story I'll be talking about today. So a little bit about my life. Then we'll get into my travels to Chile, observations of the earthquake, and then we'll go forward another 10 years to the great geological controversy. So I was born, I need to remind myself, 1785 in England. So the first thing you might be wondering is, why the American accent? Well, as you'll find out, I spent a few years in the Americas, so I must have picked it up there. It was South America. But anyway, I spent my formative years in northern England, wandering the countryside with my siblings. But at 8 years of age, I was sent off to boarding school. I was known as a savage girl. And well, there was just that one biting incident, but I think that girl actually deserved it. In any case, that gave me exposure to the older girls' classroom because I was set in the corner of that classroom. And I found, oh, I'm a little more interested in what's going on in their studies than in my elementary grade studies. And eventually the teacher of that class became my mentor. And I became quite interested in particular in botany, in art, in natural history, in metaphysics. And as I became an adult, I continued my interest in these areas. I wrote 15 books, scientific papers, and as you will find out later, the first paper published by a woman in the Journal of the Geological Society of London. And I had many artistic works. So, as I mentioned, I was born in 1785. So in my day, technology was not quite as advanced as I think it might be for all of you. So as I go through, I'm going to ask you to try to visualize the events and the artistic renderings of the landscape that I'm going to describe to you. And if you concentrate very hard, you might be able to envision some of the events that I'm going to be portraying today. So, let the story begin. Are you concentrating, envisioning? So you might notice that in this, what you might be imagining of me, this artistic portrait, when I was in my 30s, many years ago, in the early 1800s, that the dress that I'm wearing there is rather similar to the style that I am wearing here. This is what we wore in the 1820s when I was doing my field studies in Chile. Now, I'll say that this particular gown was designed for me by my good friend Robbie Soltz right here in Ellensburg, Washington. And it is extremely practical for field work. I really recommend it to you ladies. You can move, you can walk up and down the hillsides if you have some sturdy shoes. The coat, it does drag a bit, I've noticed, in the mud, but that was the style back then. So in the early 1820s, 1822, my dear husband, Thomas Graham, who was a captain in the British Navy, was assigned to captain a ship to Chile to help with the Chilean Revolution against the Spanish. Now, if we look, maybe you can envision the route here. It was a long journey, treacherous as we went around the tip of South America. The winds and seas are extremely rough down there. And to my great sorrow, my dear husband, Thomas, died en route to Chile. He was the captain of the ship. We arrived in April of 1822 in Valparaiso, Chile. So a little bit about why would the British be at all interested in the Chilean Revolution halfway around the world? Well, as it turns out, if you want any commercial interest in the Pacific and up the entire coast of the Americas, once you get through the Straits of Magellan or whatever route you take around the southern tip of South America, this port of Valparaiso is pretty much the first major port where you can do repairs, restock. So it was extremely important for the British commercial interests in the Pacific and in the Western Americas. So for that reason, they were quite involved in the revolution, which took place in 1821 and 22. So Thomas unfortunately died en route at sea, so I arrive alone, recently, very recently widowed, knew nobody, did not know the language. But fortunately, there was a large British community there, and they took me under their wings, and I stayed in Chile for another year after that, and then went on to a year in Brazil. So I was in that, hence the American accent, if you remember that. So I mentioned that I'm an artist, and I think you can probably visualize some of my black and white drawings that I did of that time. So my first house in Valparaiso was up on the hillside. And I think you can even probably think of what that same view might look like today. You can see the drawing I made from my house, my little cottage in Valparaiso up in the hillside. And the city has almost certainly by your time developed quite a bit since then. But at that time I could wander the hills, and I took my sketchbook. I did many collections of botanical specimens, which I sent back to England, to the botanical gardens there. So here's an important part of the story I'm going to be telling you, is that I take great, great pride in my careful observations of my natural surroundings. This is central to who I am. Sorry for the, sorry folks at home. Central to who I am as an observer, a natural historian, and a person of integrity. So I wandered the hills, amazing exotic landscapes and plants and animals that I had never seen before. And I took great detailed field notes for students in the audience. My field notes were impeccable and filled with illustrations of what I saw in my surroundings. So a little later in the year, I moved north a bit to the town of Quintero, which is about 20 miles or so north of Valparaiso, and had another house there. Again, I drew my view of the bay from that house. I had a commanding view of the whole bay of Quintero. And then because I have my field garb that we already know is quite practical for walking, almost every day, daily, I would take a walk along the coast in that bay, observing my surroundings. Take note of this. This is going to become important for the latter part of the story. The earthquake. Okay, here's where things get interesting. So I had arrived in April of 1822, and in November of that year, there was a great earthquake in that centered very close to Quintero, where I was living at the time. I made quite a few observations at the time of the earthquake. It was about 10:15, and I had been sitting outside with my neighbors. Remember, this is the southern hemisphere, so it was a lovely spring evening in November, if you can kind of wrap your minds around that concept. Spring in November, beautiful, quiet, clear, calm, moonlit night. Suddenly, this violent shaking lasted 3 minutes. I had my invalid cousin living with me at the time. I had to get him out of the house, myself out of the house. I noticed that the furniture had all moved in a certain direction within the house, made me think about what direction are these waves coming? The earth started rolling as if we were on a ship. It was terrifying, but fascinating at the same time. Well, we were all safe. We spent that night outside. In the subsequent weeks, there were many more aftershocks from this earthquake. I documented each and every one of those in my journal, down to the minute that it happened, how long the duration was. I even had a decanter of water sitting in the middle of my living room floor so that I could note the waves from those earthquakes, from those aftershock earthquakes that occurred in the next 3 weeks. All documented in my journal. By the way, I should mention that several of my books are even available in the library of Central Washington University. Can you believe it? So you can read this for yourselves. You might be able to picture, if you look behind me, the effects of other earthquakes in Chile. So this is a very earthquake-prone part of the world. And there have been many earthquakes documented over the years. My documentation of what happened, of the geological effects of the earthquake in 1822 are among the earliest detailed observations of the geological effects of an earthquake anywhere in the world. So I returned to England by 1824, and I wrote up my observations for the Journal of the Geological Society of London. Well, of course, I personally was not allowed to present my paper at the Geological Society because women were not allowed at the Geological Society meetings at that time. But I had a young male friend, Henry Warburton, presented my observations to the society, and they were published, as I said, the first publication by a woman in the proceedings from that particular geological society. You might be able to picture what it was like with all those men in the room arguing together during the 19th century meetings before women were allowed to sort of temper the mood a bit. So here are some of the major points that I made in that article. One is, as I already mentioned, I noted the regular direction of movement of the Earth during the earthquake. I made careful note of all of the aftershocks that occurred for weeks after that initial large shock. As I went by horseback from Quintero down to Valparaiso, I noticed in the flat plains in low areas of sand, these enormous sand volcanoes that had occurred as the earth shook and water spurted up from underneath into these large sand volcanoes, what I think has subsequently been termed liquefaction during earthquakes. But some of my major observations, and this is where the controversy came in, were on the elevation of the land during that event in 1822. So I made several observations. This was a rather hotly debated topic at the time, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But first I noticed that the bed of the sea had risen up. I noticed rocks that, remember, I went daily walking along this shore of the Quintero Bay. I knew every rock in that bay. And when I say they went up by 3 to 4 feet, they did. They went up by 3 to 4 feet. They were draped with dead sea creatures adhering to them. The stench was putrid. These had been below high tide, and now they were raised above high tide by 3 to 4 feet in the few minutes of that earthquake. So as I mentioned, rocks that had been submerged, now above the earthquake. So at Quintero, the elevation was about 4 feet, and farther south in Valparaiso, around 3 feet. Again, all these carefully documented in the paper that I had presented on my behalf at the Geological Society of London. I also surmised that perhaps there was long-term uplift of a similar nature in this area, because I noted layers of shells in the sediments above the shore 50 feet or more above the current sea level. So at my time, and remember, I think there's been new progress made in the paradigms that form the general geological thought in your time. But in these times, the idea that the earth could move vertically was still something that we didn't totally understand the mechanisms by which that might happen. But I was thinking, well, I see these shells that I know live under the sea, and they're 50 feet above the sea right now. So something must have happened. Maybe there have been many events that cumulatively have raised the land over many, many years. All right, well, that was published in 1824. I went back to England. I remarried, settled into a life as an artist, writer, illustrator. Round about 1830, someone you might have heard of, Charles Lyell, published a very well-known book. And he referred to my paper, my work on the elevation of the land during the 1822 earthquake. This did not sit well with the president of the Geological Society. He had different ideas about how vertical elevation of the land might work. This was George Bellis Greenough, president of the Geological Society in 1834. He devoted his entire presidential speech to denigrating my article. Perhaps he was not so sure about attacking Charles Lyell directly, so he thought he could attack me, a woman. And well, we'll see what happened with that. I was not one to stand by and let this happen. My brother and my husband at the time said, "We will challenge him to a duel." And I said, "No, I can fight my own battles, thank you very much." So I took each of Lord Greenough's points, and I gave a retort in an article published by the American Journal of Science, The British apparently didn't want to initially publish it, but thank you to Americans. I had my retort published in the American Journal of Science after his presidential address was published. So, oh, yes, so I look up here. First he said, well, you know, Mrs. Graham says the fishes lay dead upon the shore. Well, maybe there had been a storm and they just washed up there. Well, this is an imaginary storm. As you probably remember, I said it was a calm, serene night. There was no storm on the night of the earthquake. Okay, he says, well, how do we know that those rocks were fixed to the bottom of the sea? Maybe they were just moved in by the wave action. These rocks, I know when there is a bedrock protrusion versus some small pebble that has been washed around by the waves. These rocks were fixed to the bottom of the ocean, and you can go, even in your time, and see similar protrusions of bedrock in the Quintero Bay today. Well, respecting the elevation of the land, it hasn't been confirmed by Captain King or other men who might have been in the area. I myself must say I have the greatest respect for Captain King. Arrive in Chile until a few years later. So I really don't think that his observations, his personal observations of that event would warrant much respect. There actually were no naval officers or ships anywhere in that area of the coast during the mentioned by Lord Greenough, who might, I did, well, they were far up in the Andes at the time. And finally, he quoted some unnamed man whose opinion he thought was perhaps more reliable than me, that perhaps I was ignorant of the science of geology. Well, what I say to that is perhaps that's to my advantage. I'm not swayed by certain theories that some people adhere to perhaps a little too strongly. Terror, I was taking care of my invalid relative. I had no time for fear for myself. And then, as I told you earlier, I pride myself in my careful observations. I am not prone to exaggerate. Well, as it would happen the next year, in 1835, there was another large earthquake in Chile, slightly farther south. This one was documented by none other than Charles Darwin himself. Voyage on the Beagle as a young man, and the captain of that ship, Robert Fitzroy, they noted 8 to 10 feet of elevation of the Santa Maria Island.
Excuse me, Maria.
Yes.
Can I just switch your microphone? I don't know. You don't know what a
I'm just on
microphone
my-
is, but I would just
my
like to.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay.
So
We can I'll hold it because this is my last slide.
thank you very much.
So let's just go over some of the things that in my field investigations, ideas that I pose that have persisted for many years after. Things such as the direction of ground movement, careful documentation of aftershocks, liquefaction of wet sand during earthquakes, elevation of coast during the earthquake, and perhaps even some sort of long-term elevation, whether by earthquakes or other mechanisms. So I leave you with this idea that over time, our interpretations may change as we gather more and more knowledge about how the earth works. But careful observations, these are timeless. So thank you very much for listening to me today. I'm going to invite the other speaker who's going to pick up in time a little bit after the point where I left, and then we will answer your questions when Dr. Egger is finished with her presentation.
Maria. Thank you, Maria. That was wonderful. And we'll give our next speaker, who knows if it's Ann Egger or not, but we'll give her a chance to get set up. Remember, we're going to save save time for some questions at the end. And I think we're okay with the audio with our speaker. This microphone's got a bit of a problem for whatever reason, but we caught most of it.
Well,
And
that's good.
yes, absolutely terrific. Yes.
Maria Graham is a very dynamic speaker. The Geological Society of London really missed out on having this fantastic speaker present her own paper. Everybody hear me okay out there?
Yes, they can. You bet.
Fantastic.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So Maria ended her presentation in the 1830s and mentioned her publication in the Americas. So I wanted to start, whoop.
You got it. Sorry.
Okay. I wanted to start just a few decades later. This is not a picture from 1868, of course, but how many of you have seen the movie Little Women, the most recent version? Okay, so this is a still from that movie. That book was published in 1868. And at the time, there were not a lot of options for women. So this is from the presentation of the debutantes. You could be a school teacher before you got married, but once you got married, you were expected not to be a school teacher anymore. So there weren't a lot of options for women at that time. But seeing this movie and all these women coming down the stairs in all of this fabric, I'm not wearing a costume, but it inspired me to recreate a similar photo in our department. We have so many, this is from a few years ago, 2020. And we had so many women in this department and so many women doing amazing field work and field research. So we recreated that photo. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the milestones from that path, from the late 1800s up to 2020, and in women in the field in geology, and do that really through the lens of one institution, which is a small lens, but it does have relevance for us here, especially in the West. So this is a picture of Stanford University on its opening day in 1891. And there are a couple of things to notice in this photograph. First of all, there are lots of skirts, right? There are both women and men in this photograph. From its very first opening day, Stanford did accept both women and men. And another thing you can't see in this photograph, on day one, Stanford was free. That has changed a little bit since then, of course. Another thing you can't see in this photograph, this is a picture of the Stanford quad, but the quad was anchored by 4 disciplines that very first day, and those were history, math, engineering, and geology. So geology was the foundation of the university from day one. And in fact, the first professor hired was John Caspar Branner, who was a geologist. So also from the beginning, this is a picture from 1893. Those students in geology and in engineering at Stanford were mapping, were surveying in the field. So this is a picture of the Stanford surveying squad. And you might notice the name Herbert Hoover. Yes, it is that Herbert Hoover who was in the geology program in the first early days of Stanford. It might be hard to imagine, but Stanford really was the frontier at the time. So they were surveying and mapping right there around what's now Silicon Valley, which was not very well mapped at the time. So you will notice that it's all men in this photograph. And same with this one. So this is from a field expedition to the Klamath. No, sorry. This is the first Stanford Geological Survey. And on the back of this photo, you can see there's a little note that says over. The back, it says, "The Marauders return after 30 days in the wilderness," which suggests some other problematic things about geologic mapping at the time, but that's a different story for a different day. We're going to focus on just the arrival of women. So again, no women in this photo yet, even though they are at Stanford at this time. So Branner, that first professor, he was also involved in just the way we are recruiting students into the geology program. So he went to the nearby San Jose Normal School, similar to how CWU started as a teacher training normal school. San Jose State now was a normal school at the time, and he gave a talk about Stanford and about the geology program. And this young woman, Lou Henry, asked him, "Do you think a woman could study geology at Stanford?" And she applied in 1894 and was accepted. And here she is in those first years at Stanford in a chemistry lab there in one of the old quad buildings. So, whoops. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so Lou was not allowed to go to the field, however. It was considered too dangerous for women to go into the field. So this is a picture from 1895 while Lou Henry was in the department of the students in geology going out into the field. And you might be able to see, in addition to their tiny rock hammers, they have big guns that they were taking into the field. This was an expedition to the Klamath Mountains. There are also some large predators that were in the field at the time that are not there today. So that might be where some of the accoutrements came from. So Lou was the first female geology major. She graduated in 1898, and she was married the following year in 1899 to Herbert Hoover. And this is a picture from their wedding day. So Lou Henry became Lou Henry Hoover. They immediately moved to China, where Herbert Hoover was working as a mining geologist, mining engineer. And together, while they were there, they translated a classic text from Geology de Re Metallica. But Lou never spent time in the field. So she worked as a geoscientist. She did these translations, but she was not working with her husband in the field. Okay, so that brings us into the 20th century. 1903 was the official beginning of the Stanford Geological Survey. So this was a required course for undergraduates in the major. It was a capstone field experience. We have a similar kind of thing today. At the time, they went to a different place every year, somewhere that had not been mapped geologically, and they set up a camp like this. This picture is actually from 1919, but it didn't look that much different. Big wall tents set up for several weeks in a remote area in the field to learn more about the geology in that area and create maps of that region. This was still considered, however, too dangerous for women. So our next female geology major, there's not much information about her, but she didn't come into the program until 26 years after Lou Henry, and her name was Lillian Dobell. She was the second female geology undergraduate. So one of the things we do know about her is that she had to take time off in 1922, which was somewhat similar to 2022. The Spanish flu hit the country, the world very hard, and the university was struggling to stay in session at the time. So she took time off for that. She did graduate in 1924. Like I said, there's not a lot of information about her, but she did a thesis. Her thesis was on euhedral crystals. So it probably didn't involve fieldwork. She was probably mostly in the lab, in the microscopes. And after she graduated, she worked as the interim librarian in the Branner Library. So Branner's book collection outgrew his office, and so this became a library in 1915. So 1924, we have our second geology major. A few years later, we have number 3, Mary Balch. And this is her report on the geology of the New Almaden Quadrangle. So Mary's an interesting person. We learned quite a bit about her because she lived to be 103. So we had lots of time to learn from her experiences. So her father, she grew up in Los Gatos, very close to Stanford. Her father had a friend who was a mining engineer, so she grew up going to the mines in this New Almaden area, which are all mercury mines. So she had learned a little bit about the geology. She got very interested in the area. But she was told, again, that it was too dangerous to go into the field with 20 men. Probably true. And so she did field work from her home in Los Gatos. So here's the preface to that report. The following report is compiled from data obtained this summer on the geology of this area. It was designed to take the place of the summer geology courses. It was all summer long. She did field work for more than 2 months, from June to August. It was varied now and then for special reasons, such as the absence of her professor or a forest fire. But basically, she spent most of 2 months, 5 days a week, in the field around New Almaden. She made a map. She made a cross-section. So she did everything that these 20 men were doing in the field together, working together, and she did it by herself. So, and she apparently braved a forest fire, although we don't learn a whole lot more about that. So here's a picture of Mary from 1991. As I said, she lived until 2012, and she was 103 when she died. She worked for the California Division of Mines and Geology and the USGS after she graduated. And she was interviewed in 1999 and described some of what she faced. I thought this was an amusing story. So one day toward the end of summer, my father came home from the bank and said that a man had come in and asked for her hand in marriage. She asked what he said, and he said no. But that the reason she thought he was interested is because here's someone, she can carry rocks. Here's someone who can do the kind of work that I need. So this is the kind of experiences she was having in the field as she was out there working by herself. So she did, after she graduated, her husband was a civil engineer. She got married, and she did a lot of informal advising with her husband. And she could look at the sites where the dams were being put in and look for faults and that kind of thing. And she also described herself as being very good at evaluating the character of people that they were working with. So she did a little informal advising of her husband in his projects. So meanwhile, this has all been Stanford focused so far. Meanwhile, other universities were starting to get into the game a little bit, and they were establishing what were known as set camps. So where the Stanford Geological Survey went to a different area every year that hadn't been mapped before, places like Indiana University set up these field stations, many of which are still running today, have had long-running, very successful field camps. So the one at Indiana is located in Montana. Started in 1949, and this picture is from 1961. You can see a few women down there in the front row from the camp that year. And there were, at the time, this was the only option for the Stanford women geology students. So a student named Odette Brinkman at the time fought her way onto being able to take one of these set camp courses. She did. This is she went in 1962, but she called it child's play compared to what the men were doing or what her Stanford colleagues were doing. So that year, the Stanford Geological Survey was being taught, incidentally, by Bob Compton, who is known as the guy who wrote the book about how to map in the field and what to doing geology in the field. So this was first published. This is a newer version, but that book was published the same year that women were still going to set camps elsewhere. Okay, but now, 1964, there are 3 female geology students. And they have heard from Odette Brinkman, and they have decided that now is the time they're going to petition the Dean of Women to and the president to attend the Stanford Geological Survey field camp. And they can't think of any reason to say no. So 1964, these three women pioneer their attendance at the Stanford Geological Survey. Judy Terry there on the right is the reason that we have that interview with Mary Balch. She did some work much later to document the early history of the geology program at Stanford. And they all continued to work in geology after this event. So the Professor Arthur Howard at the time said, it worked out so well, we no longer have any misgivings. So the doors are open, women can attend our field camp. So that was 1964. There were no women students in 1965. And then from 1966 on, there were women every year that participated in that field camp. And it continued to be taught by Bob Compton for many, many years. In 1979 is when Elizabeth Miller, over there on the, let's see, your left, my right, was hired to teach the field camp and take it over. So she was the first woman to be hired into that position. She was 27 at the time. These were her TAs for the field course at the time, and this guy will appear again, the one in the middle of the men. And then that field camp ran until 1993. So she ran it for 15 years, and it fell victim to declining numbers of majors and increasing costs as well. So 1979 to 1993. 1998, I applied to Stanford University to work with Elizabeth Miller, and I was pretty sure later that she accepted me because I'd been a river guide and I knew how to cook for a lot of people in the field because those skills came in very handy as we continued. So I started off in a very traditional field mapping thesis. This is a map from my master's thesis area, which was an area where the Stanford Geological Survey had gone. And as Maria pointed out, that there are paradigm shifts, but good observations can be reinterpreted. And this was a perfect example of that exact thing. I won't get into the geology of it, but I was going back to an area they had mapped and connecting some dots and reinterpreting a lot of that. I also, from 1998 to 2001, TA'd was a teaching assistant for the introductory field methods camp, which was run out of Bishop, California, same place some of you have been for a couple-week field camp. And this is 2001 was the last year that was run. The instructor is, sorry, I should be doing this. Here's the instructor. That was one of the TAs from Elizabeth's first year as a field camp instructor. And you might notice that there are 4 students here. They're all women. And that was the last year of that particular field course. And those were the years I really got to know the Bishop area and the area we take students today. I think that's also somewhere in there was the first year that I met Nick and Charlie Rubin out in the field. So after that, I left Stanford to teach at a community college in New Mexico. And this is on the edge of the Navajo Reservation. And I mention this in part because it really opened my eyes to another big component of fieldwork. And about 30% of the students at this school, San Juan College, were Navajo. And we were taking students into the field in places where they had deep understandings and stories and histories that were complementary to and different from what we describe as geologists. So I learned a lot about how to ask about those stories, how to bring them into our interpretations as geoscientists, and to help integrate those and not be a marauder in the wilderness, I guess, but instead to think about how we can incorporate each other's interpretations of these landscapes. I did, however, I learned a lot at that community college and teaching in that environment, but I did find that I missed research. So I ended up back at Stanford a few years later, and I was working as the undergraduate program coordinator in our sciences. And Elizabeth immediately roped me back into leading field trips. So we started going back to Owens Valley and the Sierras here. Here's a picture from one of those first field trips. And shortly thereafter, in 2006, we revived the Stanford Geological Survey. And here we are in a wall tent out in an area that had not been mapped before, the Warner Range of California. And that year, we had 5 female students, 1 male TA, and I was the instructor. And those of you, if you remember some of the first talks that I gave when I first arrived here, this is the Warner Range in California. This is where I did my PhD work as well. So one of the things that I really loved about working in this area and loved about working in the field is that it gave me the opportunity to go beyond what I thought of as that traditional field mapping and start to establish some new collaborations and new techniques. So here I am. I thought of it at the time as moving from the mountains down into the basin. So I had been working in the mountains and doing traditional mapping, and here I strapped on a bunch of geophysical equipment and started making different kinds of observations in the field. Even doing some seismic experiments with the hammer. And so this is once I'm here at Central, and I kept, of course, my involvement in teaching in the field as well. And this is such a critical part of what we do as geoscientists, to have that understanding of what the Earth actually is and how we bring that into our studies, where whatever direction they take, having that fundamental understanding. So CW has been going down to the Owens Valley for, let's see, 25 years in 2018. So someone else can do the math. And there's so we have lots of group photos from this, and you can see all the people that have participated in this. And in particular, I wanted to point out something that happened in 2019, because it brings us back to Mary Balch, which is that we still are avoiding forest fires in the field sometimes, and maybe it's even more common than it was. So this was a day in 2019 that prevented us from getting into our field area. We had quite a good view of the helicopters. So I continue, and our students continue to learn new techniques in the field. This is my graduate student, Elizabeth, is down there at the end of the trench. And I learned from her and her advisor at University of Oregon how to do a whole new technique and dig a trench into the playa and uncover faults in the earthquake history in that region. So continuing to add collaborations and new techniques is a key element of the field work that we do today. Okay, so back to the women in our department. So this is, yes, a few years old, but the idea is not so different. And Stanford was I gave you that lens of one institution and how that progressed, but that was happening all over the country. And all of us in this picture have similar histories behind us. And despite all of the barriers and hurdles that have been in place over the years, we've all overcome them as a culture, or overcoming them as a culture, and individually as well. So here's what all of those women do in the field. And I also just want to say a few thank you words. Julie Sweetkind-Singer at Stanford helped a ton with getting all of that information about Stanford history together. And thank you to my colleagues here and to everyone who has helped bring women into the field over the decades and centuries. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria, could you come back up to the front, please? And can we do some live question and answer? Looks like Anne's going to have the hot mic up there. And please, and Can you please repeat the questions for our home crowd? And we'll just go for this couple extra minutes here. Thank you.
You can ask questions for Maria too. I can just,
You can just pass a little microphone back and forth,
we could.
or whatever, and we'll field my questions.
For how long was Stanford free?
Cato asked how long was Stanford free. I don't know the answer to that question. It's not for very long because it was it's hard to run a university on no tuition.
More questions?
I have a question for Maria. Do you know why you wanted now to be in the Geological Society meeting, but it published under your name?
So the question was, why was Maria not allowed to attend the Geological Society meeting, but could publish under her name? I can only speculate on that, but at that time, papers were presented in person as presentations, and then the proceedings were published in the journal. And so I think the thought that it was just not appropriate for women to be participating in the meeting, but their words could be read on paper. Other questions?
So, question for Anne, a little more modern. So it sounds like women geologists didn't really become a thing until like the 60s and then started to pick up. And in your time, since you started studying geology, what advancements or accommodations or accessibility in geology have you seen for what, 30 years?
So the question is about what changes have I seen in my time in terms of accommodations for women specifically?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good question. So one of the things I don't know about accommodations, that's necessarily the right word, but if I think about the changes that I've seen, so for example, when I started at Stanford in 1998, there were still only 2 women on the faculty, and they were the same 2 women who'd been on the faculty for 20 years. So there was there had not been a change in the proportion of female faculty, even though the proportion in the graduate students and the undergraduate students had changed. And in fact, as you saw in the pictures, the number of students had in fact gone the opposite direction, that there was a larger proportion of female students. There is much more awareness about the challenges, I suppose, faced by women getting into a field that is dominated by men or has been traditionally dominated by men. Unfortunately, there's been some terrible incidences that have come to light that have led to more regulation about things like remote field stations and being able reporting structures, that kind of thing. But to have a department like we do here that's more than 50% women faculty is still unusual in the country, but it is more and more common that there's at least parity in the faculty. It's kind of a long answer, sorry.
Papa Gino at home asks, what percentage of the geology students at CWU are female currently?
Yeah, let's see, raise your hand. I would say 50% or more. I think we're at least, yeah. Okay, stop there. Yeah, Rachel.
What part of the country isn't very studied yet and why?
What part of this country?
What's the question?
Do you mean that sort of field? So Rachel asked what part of the country isn't very well understood and why. So I'll in terms of field mapping, a lot of the areas that were at least initially mapped were done so for resources, mining, oil and gas, that kind of thing. So areas that are not resource rich and not well populated are not well mapped. Still, I think I can say that.
I know that in my undergrad experience, even my grad school experience now, a lot of my professors and like peers have been women. And I'm sure that's changed with degree level and like over time. But what are your, both of you guys' opinions about the future of women in this series?
Could you repeat that somehow? Thank you.
I'm not good with this modern technology. So Bethany asked about where do we see the role of women in geology, or particularly in the field, perhaps in the future. And I mean, I would see women as representing our proportion in the overall population. So I would say I see this department in particular, where, as Anne said, there are majority female faculty and have been for a couple of decades, as what perhaps programs around the country will be moving toward. You want to add to that, Anne?
I'll say one thing, sure.
Passing the pipe.
Yeah, I agree with Lisa. I mean with Maria. Okay. Right now, there are subdisciplines or areas that have more women and fewer women, and I think that's probably likely to continue to be the case. What I hope continues in the future is that women don't feel like they can't go into subdisciplines because of whether it's fear of discrimination or harassment or whatever, that there's nothing preventing them from pursuing the subdiscipline that they would like to pursue.
I think that's a good place to end. Can we thank our speakers again today, please?
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Have a good weekend. Excellent job. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Are we still 5x5, home viewers? Can we talk for just a couple minutes before we sign off here?
Thank you both. Fantastic. Good.
You bet. No problem. Okay. We're 5x5? Okay. Thank you for joining us today at home. Couple final comments and then we'll go. Hi, Sasha. Thanks for coming. You heard me announce maybe at the beginning, but maybe you didn't hear it at the end, that we have 2 more of these Friday noon talks this winter quarter. The schedule's not in front of me, but it's 2 weeks from now and 3 weeks from now. Basically the last Friday of February and the first Friday of March. And I will be done with the Baja BC series by then. And so I will have things rejiggered here so that I am able to post this live stream ahead of time. What I'm trying to say is that at least for the next few noon Friday talks, I won't be live streaming out of the blue like I did today, but I'll have a posted link ahead of time, even a day ahead of time, so that it'll be a little easier to find these and kind of plan accordingly. But that's just for folks watching live. For those that are watching the replay, which is most of you, Of course, you can watch it anytime you want. Many of you, looks like you are, you enjoyed that, and I'm happy to see that. There's Jeff from Vinman's. Thanks again, Jeff, for Jeff, talking to you. Jeff from Vinman's. Whatever you want to bring on a given Talk Friday is great with us. You brought an extra amount today, and it all went because it was a big crowd. It's all gone. But if you want to go back to doing 1 box, 2 boxes, that's totally fine. There's plenty of other, there's drinks and everything else. So thank you to Vinman's Bakery. You've got to love it. I'm not posting any of their papers. When is CW evening meetings? Not sure what that means, Cindy. Geology runs on Vinman's. Oh, that's a t-shirt, Greg. Thank you. 3 more questions before we say goodbye. What area of expertise do they work on? Anne has been here. Ann Egger. I'll go in the order of the speakers. Maria, played by Lisa Ely, is a geomorphology professor. She's mostly a river person. She studied under Vic Baker at the University of Arizona, and she has been a regular mentor to many, many grad students here over the years. Probably some of the geologists that you know studied under Lisa Ely here at CWU. And she's the same vintage as I am. We've been here together for a long time. Anne is more of a geology education professor and is involved with National Association of Geoscience Teachers and organizations like that. Okay, I think that's enough for today. I will see many of you tomorrow morning. That's Saturday morning, February 11th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And we will be with Chris Mattinson, who you might have seen today. But Chris will be our featured speaker next time. And the Rock Liquor I can see the Rock Liquor projected up on the screen. Bryce, the Rock Liquor. You want to see the Rock Liquor? Look at that. He's a Boy Scout. He's like helping Maria out of the building and helping her across the street so she doesn't get hit by a horse and buggy. Just kidding. Bryce, the Rock Liquor, has been a student volunteer to help set up every Friday. Bryce does it all. He's totally in part of the scene. Okay. So thanks, everybody. I love you, and we'll see you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Pacific for session X, starring Chris Mattinson. Thank you. I love you, and goodbye.